Chapter 8. The generator sputtered and the lights flickered. Calhoun looked up at them with a nervous smile. A dim, rosy glow had appeared on the eastern horizon. Even behind the thick, bruised cloud cover, it was enough light to dispel some of the shadows on the rig. In a way, that was worse. Several meters away from the flickering circle of light, he could see the glint of a belt buckle, rivets from blue jeans, and a pocket knife. That was all that remained of Jack Hosley. As if that wasn't bad enough, they could see the black. It no longer surrounded them. It had pulled itself around the edges of the western side of the circle. It seemed to know light was coming. He wasn't sure how it would react when sunlight finally kissed the rig and chased away the shadows, but he had a feeling it wouldn't stick around very long. A single half-meter-high eye stalk rose from its flat obsidian surface. The circle of people had all turned to watch it. The stalk waved in the freshening wind. The smell of rain had filled their noses. The storm was coming, or at least its outer bands. The black rippled and shook as a single ray of sunlight broke through the cloud cover. The eastern side of the rig brightened for a moment, and then the puddle slid further away from them. Both Calhoun and Shauna had gotten over their shock at seeing the thing. Ever since dawn had started and the black was visible, they had watched it, studied it. It hadn't shown any aggression since it took Jack. Calhoun figured the damage it took from the bright lights had been enough to keep it at bay. That and the fact they had all moved to the center of the circle. It couldn't attack them without suffering damage. On the one hand, that meant it felt pain and they could fight it. On the other, that meant it was capable of strategy and going on more than simple instinct. Calhoun didn't like that at all. The clouds brightened as the sun rose over the horizon. A tendril of smoke erupted from the eye stalk. The puddle shook like pudding and retreated another meter. The deck was larger than a football field, and the black covered at least half of it. Calhoun couldn't tell how thick it was, but he thought it had spread itself thin to cover as much ground as possible. Another white finger of smoke filled the air above the puddle. The eye stalk quivered and shrank back into the black. The eye was no more than a few centimeters above its surface. The black receded into itself, thickening and shrinking in size at the same time. It started to move. The circle of trapped people watched as it traveled to the western stairs. It moved to the bottom step, and then a reverse river of black rose up the stairs and into the superstructure. Vrabel blew out a sigh. Are we safe? Calhoun shook his head. Not till we're off the rig or that thing has been burned into nothing. Bill moved to stand up and Vrabel raised a hand. Not yet, Bill. Let's wait until the rig is in full sunlight. I don't like the idea of that thing playing possum. The large man's face wrinkled in frustration, and then he sat back down. Calhoun? Vrabel asked. You agree? Absolutely. Catfish? He said as he opened his eyes. He'd been asleep for the last hour. What? He looked around and then smiled. It's gone? Calhoun nodded. We need to get the AUVs powered up and ready. We're going to need to reprogram them for something special. Running two fingers through his dirty blonde hair, Catfish looked even more confused. For what? Calhoun grinned and turned to Vrabel. We have explosives? Vrabel blinked. Yeah, of course. To fracture the strata below the ocean floor if we're having trouble getting the oil flowing. A frown crossed his face. You're not serious. What? Catfish asked. What the hell are you talking about, boss? Calhoun clasped his hands together. We have two things we have to take care of. We have to get rid of that, he said, pointing to the superstructure, and make sure it doesn't get back in the ocean. And how are we going to do that? Blow up the goddamn rig? Catfish asked. Calhoun shook his head. No, we'll have to do something less, violent. I'm still working on that. He paused. But we need to make sure whatever's below the ocean floor stays there. We can't let that shit get out of the trench. If we take out both, Shauna said, they won't have a reason to nuke us, or whatever they might do. Right, Calhoun said. But we can't have anyone else infected, and we'll have to track down the other entities and destroy them too. What does that have to do with the AUVs? Vrabel asked. We can use an explosive shot down through the drill string. That would blow the well up and... He paused. Wait, why do you think an explosion is going to do anything? Because, Shauna said with a smile, this stuff is damned volatile to flame and bright light. She pointed at Calhoun. He thinks we can set the whole trench on fire, burn it all up. Calhoun nodded. I do. It's obviously contained. There's no water reservoir to keep the fire from spreading. It should cause a chain reaction. Vrabel shook his head. You don't understand, Calhoun. Those shots are meant to blow a hole, not start a goddamn inferno. You don't even know if there's going to be enough flame to catch anything on fire. Catfish groaned. How big of a hole can we make at the spud site? Well, Vrabel said, if we put down a huge shot, we'll blow the drill string, but we could probably knock through enough rock to fit something big. We just won't know if it's enough to get through to the oil. It will be, Shauna said. It's not dense down there. It's almost like a blanket wrapped around something else. She thought for a second and then clapped her hands. Fuck me, she said. Her eyes widened and gleamed. The spongy stuff in the core sample, she said to Calhoun. What do you think that is? It's prison, Calhoun said, or something a little more disquieting. Like what? Vrabel asked. What the hell could contain that stuff? Calhoun licked his chapped lips. God, but he needed a cigar and a lot of water. Remember how the entire trench moved? I don't think that was the black flowing beneath the surface. I think it was something else. Shauna gulped. You think there's something else down there? Catfish sighed. Fucking sea monsters now, are you serious? Bear with me, Calhoun said. What if the strange substance in the core sample is skin? Flesh? The body of some other creature? What if the black is something other than what we've seen? What if it's the organism's blood? The circle all blinked but said nothing. The light had grown. Those facing the east squinted against the dawn's orange rays. You're crazy, Vrabel said. Certifiably crazy. Calhoun nodded. I know how it sounds. The dim light covered the deck. The sun continued its rise into the sky, but the massive buildup of clouds kept it from drenching the deck in brightness. That's not everything either, Catfish said. I need to get into the drilling office. Oh, we're going there too, Calhoun said. But we have to get Gomez off the bridge. Just how are we going to do that? Vrabel asked. The generator coughed and then went silent. First, we need to get that refueled. Do you have another one up here? Vrabel blinked. We have 3. Good, Calhoun said. He looked up at the sky. And then we're going to need something to carry them around. The storm was moving in. In a few hours, the wind was going to increase and the rain would begin falling from the sky. The waves were going to become swells, and when that happened, the rig was going to buck like a bronco. Gomez looked at the weather radar. He'd been staring at it for the last hour, watching as the bands of red continued driving toward them. Grim entertainment, but it was better than looking at Terrell's corpse, which, by the way, was getting a little ripe. At first, he'd thought the black sludge had returned. He sat against the wall, flashlight pointed at the grate, for nearly 10 minutes before he noticed Terrell's belly swelling up like a balloon. Instead of suffering with the stench, he dragged the corpse to the far corner of the room. A smear of bodily fluid soiled the floor in long lines of brown, red, and gray. When the light first started to rise over the horizon, he'd peered out the bridge windows to view the deck. He'd watched as the light started to touch the rig and the sea of black retreated to the western staircase. That meant the monstrous thing was back inside the superstructure. He wondered how long he had before it showed up. He had a bad feeling a halogen flashlight wasn't going to be enough to fight it off. His phone beeped. He sighed and picked it up. Vrabel. His finger slid across the screen and the message appeared. Hang tight. We're coming for you. Gomez read the words twice before they sunk in. A grim smile lit his face. He looked around the bridge. Vrabel's satchel sat in the wall locker. Gomez picked it up and rifled through it looking for something useful. He found Vrabel's phone charger, his wallet, a set of keys, a spare shirt, and an emergency medical kit. He shoved the flashlight inside and pulled out the medical kit. He smothered the wounds on his left hand with burn cream and then wrapped it in heavy gauze. He had no illusions it would hold, but at least the pain receded. Wound tended, he packed up the supplies and put them back in the satchel. The locker had 3 life vests, a flare gun, and several rounds. Gomez smiled at the red plastic gun. He cracked its breech, loaded a flare inside, stuffed 3 more of the flares inside his pants pocket, and stuck the gun in his belt. He zipped up the satchel and put it next to his feet. When he looked back down at the rig deck, the circle of people was gone. The halogens were gone, and so was the generator. Dios mío, he said. You fuckers are crazy. He didn't know exactly what they were planning, but he hoped they'd be here soon. He didn't know how much longer he could stay conscious. The lights were on inside. At least that much was going according to Calhoun's plan. As for the rest of it, she thought he was nuts. But since no one had a better idea... 3 burly roughnecks and Vrabel dragged a generator up the stairs. There was a cargo elevator, but it was on the other side of the rig. Besides, she didn't think anyone wanted to be trapped in there in case the lights went out. Or worse. When they climbed the top of the stairs, they set the gas generator on the landing and then ran down the stairs to grab the halogens and a hand truck. Once everyone was positioned, they hooked the halogens up to the generator and kicked it on. Maneuvering the hand truck past the narrow corner leading to the main hallway was hellish, and it took 2 of the roughnecks to shimmy it into position. The bridge was down 2 corridors and then to the left. Bill, the roughneck who had tried to save Jack Hosley, demanded to be in the lead. He held the heavy work light in his hands. "If that thing comes out, I want to make sure it gets what's coming to it," Bill growled as he lifted the light. Shauna was behind the hand truck. Another worker, a tall, thick, bald man named Robert Creeley, brought up the rear. In a way, she thought his job was the most difficult. He covered the rear by holding another lamp and walking backwards behind the generator. Vrabel and Dick Green carried their lamps as well, but theirs were off. When they reached points in the hall with vents or exposed ducts, they turned them on and shined the brilliant light at them until the party went past. It was slow going. Despite the chill air coming from the AC, Shauna and the group were sweating. Her job, making sure the cables didn't get tangled while pushing the hand truck, was more difficult than she'd imagined. Meter by meter, they traveled down the main hallway to the first corridor. Bill held up his hand when he was near it. He slowly pulled on the extension cord until he had enough slack, and then shined the light down the left hallway. Vrabel did the same, but pointed his to the right. The 2 men were breathing hard, and Shauna could tell their adrenaline had spiked. At any moment, the creature could drop down through a panel in the roof, come pouring out of a ventilation duct, or just be waiting for them around a corner. "Clear," Vrabel said, his voice soft but distinct. "Clear," Bill said. "Going left." He advanced a meter down the hall and waited while Shauna pushed the handcart. Vrabel kept his light pointed down the other side of the hall until Robert had enough slack to cover the rear, and shuffled past the hand truck to follow Bill. Sweat poured off the group. The smell of rot and mildew whooshed through the AC vents. Shauna felt like she was going to vomit. A look around at the others told her they were having the same problem with the air. Come out, wherever you are," Bill said. "You fucker." He continued down the hall, the group in tow. Doors to storage and equipment rooms lined the corridor. As he came to each, Vrabel shined his light at the cracks between the doorframe and the floor. Shauna suddenly wished all the rooms had hatches. They could see the next turn up ahead. After that, it would be relatively easy to get to the bridge. As they neared the next hall, Bill held up his hand for the group to stop. Shauna brushed a sheen of sweat from her forehead and wiped her moist hands on her khakis. Her clothes reeked of salt air, diesel, and sweat. And she wasn't the only one with eau du stinky. The whole group needed a dip in the ocean, if not a hot shower. Bill peered around the wall and froze. "Jesus," he said. Vrabel was already covering the other side of the hallway. Without turning, he asked, "What is it?" Bill shook his head. "Goddamn sheetrock is gone. All the way down the hall. Just studs and metal." "You see anything else?" Shauna asked. Bill was silent for a moment. "I've never seen the floor so shiny." Shauna groaned. "It's been here. It dissolved whatever was on the floor as well as the sheetrock. Are the studs damaged too?" "Can't tell," Bill said. "You guys ready to move up?" "Clear here," Vrabel said. "Watch the vents up ahead, Bill." "Got it," the roughneck said. "Robert, you ready?" "Yeah," his baritone voice boomed. Shauna pushed the hand truck and awkwardly maneuvered it behind Bill. He waited until he felt the edge of the generator against his ass and then started forward. Robert carefully walked past the generator and into the hallway, his light covering the rear. Vrabel pointed his light at the upper edge of the left wall. Green's light covered the right. Shauna pushed the hand truck slowly behind Bill. Above the generator's din, she heard a scratching sound. "Bill?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "I heard it." "The fuck is that?" Robert yelled. Shauna fought the urge to turn around. "What's going on, Robert?" Vrabel asked. The scratching sound was louder, Something clanged to the floor behind her. "God damn it!" Robert shouted. Her resolve broke and she turned around. Her breath stopped in her throat. 3 ceiling tiles had disintegrated. The light at the other end of the hallway were going out one by one as the sizzling sound increased in volume. The right wall's sheetrock dissolved beneath the dead lights. Bill growled. "Let's move, people. We've got to get Gomez out of there." He continued forward. Shauna turned back around, her skin covered in goose flesh and her breathing labored. She felt like her heart was going to leap out of her throat. The hand truck was getting heavier, her lips upturned in a grim smile. Of course the fucking thing isn't getting heavier. You're just tired. They still had to make it to the bridge. The return trip was going to be hell. If there was one, a voice said in her mind. She did her best to drown it out by focusing on the cables. Creeley hissed through his teeth. "I can't see it." God, but she wanted to turn and see what he was seeing. As she continued following Bill, she imagined the black ooze creeping down the hall and nipping at her boots. "How big is it?" she asked. "Fucking big enough," Robert yelled. Bill walked faster. Shauna quickened the pace, but her arms burned with fatigue. Before too long, she simply wouldn't be able to push anymore. She knew she was running on adrenaline and little else. The extension cord feeding Robert cinched taut. The generator tried to slide off the handcart. "Keep up," she yelled. Slack, glorious slack showed up in the line, but she could hear Robert puffing behind her. It sounded like he was going to have a heart attack. Up ahead, Bill took the left turn to the bridge hatch. He didn't slow before taking the corner. She imagined him falling backwards, a large creature of black dissolving his clothes, flesh and bones. Instead, she heard him banging on the hatch. "Gomez, it's Bill, open up." For a moment, nothing happened. She turned her head to look behind them. The hallway was dark. The black had chewed through the wall panels, ceiling tiles, and the light fixtures. She was willing to bet there was plenty of metal up there still holding the fluorescent tubes together, but the wires were most likely stripped and the plastic dissolved into atoms. She followed the light as Robert waved it around the hallway. Sure enough, the halogen bounced off metal fasteners, screws, and sheets. The floor, however, was empty. "Where did it go?" she asked. Robert shook his head but didn't turn around. "I don't know," he said. "I saw it back there at the end of the hall, and now it's gone. I tried to get a bead on it with the light, but it's just not strong enough to reach." Shauna flinched when she heard the hatch open with a grinding groan. "Gomez?" Bill said. "You look like shit." He turned back to the hall to see Bill bear-hug the short Hispanic man. Bill was right. Gomez looked ragged and barely alive. The man was dazed and stared with glazed eyes. "Here," Bill said and offered his arm. "Hang on to me. We're getting you out of here." Something sizzled behind the walls. They all froze. Shauna gulped as both Vrabel and Dick shined their halogens near the ceiling tiles. She placed a hand against the wall. It was warm to the touch. "Guys, something very bad is happening." Vrabel turned to her and snarled. "And that would be something new?" She ignored his sarcasm. "I think it's in the walls. It must—" Her words were cut off as Dick started screaming.